All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Hutchinson. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the Ignacio Community Library. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Margaret Kirk, the author of the book They Persisted, which chronicles 21 different women around the turn of the 20th century who all made great strides in whatever fields they worked in, and promoted not only success among women, but pushed for greater equality. And we originally were going to try to have Margaret here at the Ignacio Library in the month of March, but since the entire theme of the year 2020 really is that hindsight is 2020, that obviously did not work out well with the coronavirus. But we thought about doing this in the month of August because the day we're going to post this interview, the 18th, is the 100-year anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, granting women in the United States the right to vote. So, Margaret, thank you so much for being flexible, and we're so excited we're finally able to get this interview accomplished.
Me too, Andy. Thank you so much. I guess this is where you wanted me to talk a little bit about my background. I was a Rhode Island state social worker for over 30 years, came out here and retired, and now I'm blessed because I work part-time at the Mancos Public Library. My educational background is my bachelor's degree was in women's studies and family development, and then my master's was in feminism and social justice. And then I did a little more study at the University of Santa Monica when they had their satellite in Pennsylvania, doing applied psychology and heart-centered counseling. So that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. And it's always good to talk to a fellow librarian as well.
You know, it's funny, back east, I probably shouldn't say this, but I applied more times than I can tell you for library jobs because I love libraries. And I was never qualified. And once I got out here and got my job at the Mancos Library 20 years ago, my children said, "Ma, what you need is a 12-step program, not to work in the library." So yes, I'm thrilled.
Excellent. Yeah, and I also ended up in library work by accident. I used to be a middle school teacher, and when I moved here, I was going to do that, but in the mid-time before I waited for a job to open, I thought, oh, maybe I'll get a part-time library job, and then I ended up getting full-time here, and then I fell in love with it and have stuck. So it's
Nice.
interesting how you find yourself in library work. Well, I wanted to begin by first commending you on this book. I absolutely loved it. I read it about a month ago in order to prep for this interview. And what I really enjoyed about it is you go into it with hearing some names, at least that for me were familiar, but plenty of the women I did not know. So it got me a chance to get to know so many different women that accomplished such great things. And so that led me to wondering what inspired you originally to write a book like this, and also how long did it take you from having the idea to actually finishing it for you to actually get it done?
The answer to that question is 30 years. I collected information, and I think the whole idea of women being strong has always fascinated me because with my upbringing, that was a fault. I was too much. I was too strong. I was too outspoken. And looking at my family, my father had three beautiful sisters, and they were all highly intelligent and pretty darn strong. My mom was very, very much what a traditional woman of that era should be. Very loving, a wonderful mother, a great housewife, active in the church, but very passive. I mean, her favorite expression was, "What can we do?" And I always thought we can do something, So that was my attraction to strong women. And, I was in my 40s taking a women's history class, and I learned in my 40s about Sojourner Truth, about Harriet Tubman. Why didn't I know about them before? I was in my 40s. So I began collecting over that 30 some odd year period. When I would see a woman, a name that would interest me or a cause that she was involved in, I'd write her name down. And when I started to write this book, I have, I think, 4 3-ring binders filled with notes and names and, some stuff on cocktail napkins even stuck in there. And it actually took me about 7 or 8 months to write the book.
All right. And what year was that?
2017.
Oh, okay. Because I knew the book was more recent, so that's when you finally sat down and pieced
Yeah.
it all together.
Yes.
All right. And that leads to my next question. How did you narrow down your list? So there's 21 women in here. How did you narrow that down? And also, were there women that you started to write about that didn't actually make it in the book? And were there women that you didn't think would end up in the book but did?
Well, first of all, this is going to sound a little weird, but I didn't choose the women, they chose me. And
Mm-hmm.
I probably had 200, 250 possibles in those binders and cocktail napkins. And at the onset, I they would find me, and then I would just spend days with them and fleshing out. I I talked to a lot of colleges and universities. Smith College was wonderful. Historical societies, they were amazing for fleshing out more of the facts around these women. The Amon Carter Museum in Texas around one of my characters. And so they would just, and I made great friends talking with them because they would become as impassioned as I was about this woman I was researching. So yeah, that's, and I actually, by the time I finished this book, I envisioned a trilogy. And I am working on the second book right now, the title of which is They Roared. And it's muckrakers, journalists, and some test pilots from World War II. They didn't fly in combat, but they flew those jets. So I'm actually working on revising the first book, which I'm having a hard time marketing because in my heart of hearts, there are so many typos in there, and we won't go into the whole long story, but it wasn't all my fault. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm looking at redoing the first book with the same women and then finishing the second book.
Okay, interesting. And then for the first book, a lot of or pretty much all these women lived around the turn of the 20th century, or that was the time you kind of chronicled. And then it sounds like for the next book, you're moving forward in time a little bit. So is
Nope,
there?
same period. I love that
Oh,
period.
okay. So why did you choose that period specifically?
My paternal grandmother, Honora Sullivan, was a beautiful young lass from Ireland. And when she finished high school, she worked for a doctor outside of Boston. And the doctor and his wife recognized that the woman was incredibly bright, had a talent for medicine. So they approached the family and said, we'd love to send Noni to college because women were beginning to go into medical school at that point in time. And the family was like, oh my God, she's a woman. And that was the end of that. So, you know, it kind of, with that in my background, knowing, I never knew my grandmother, but I felt her influence a lot in my life. But I did know my three aunts, who I said were very, very strong. And each accomplished a lot in their own lives. So that primarily my grandmother was there saying, you know, you got to pay attention to these strong women.
Mm-hmm. So it was your grandmother and the fact that she lived around then that sort of drew you to that time, and then.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I think the fact that so many women were just beginning to take the reins and say, we can be educated, we can be professionals, we can be doctors, we can be lawyers, and we need the vote.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that leads to my next question. So many of the women you wrote about attributed at least some of their success in their lifetimes to getting a formal or secondary education. Why do you think education played such a pivotal role in these women's triumphs?
I thought about that question a lot, and I think it comes down to one word, the toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
If a woman has then or now a toolbox with tools that she can use in her life, then she's going to be able to succeed. She's going to be able to dream those dreams, follow those dreams, and succeed. And I know that's a very simplistic answer, but it's really what I believe. And I mean, in my own life, there were roadblocks, there was poverty, there was single parenthood, but I pretty much was able to accomplish what I wanted to in my lifetime. And my biggest and best job was being a parent, and I loved it. So yeah, I think it's the toolbox with the education, and you know, whether it's education in the arts, in the sciences, or in trades, that's important too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that continues even to nowadays. And we're still seeing the fight for women to get educated around the world.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely such an important issue.
I had to
Um,
throw in here too, the woman that I dedicated this book to, Barb Macratz, works in Africa a lot with women and with literacy and with other things. I really recommend you check out her website, Olive Seed Foundation. But Barb brought my books to Africa, so the young women in Africa are, and men are reading this book. So that
mhm.
thrilled me.
Oh, that's such a great story. Yeah, and that's a great plug to for anyone interested in looking at her website for sure. The title of your book is They Persisted, and this kind of ties into just what we've been talking about a little bit, but in what areas of society today do you still see the need for women to keep persisting?
Well, we have 3 hours for this interview, so here we go. I think gender bias,
Mhm.
racism, misogyny, positions of power, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, bless her heart, women belong in any room where decisions are being made, and I really do believe that. Human trafficking and the normalization of patriarchy, equal opportunity, economic opportunity. We need to bust sexism. Now, Gilligan and Snyder have just published a book, and it's called Why the Patriarchy Exists. I haven't read the book yet, but I've read some excerpts. And in this book, she starts out by saying, Carol Gilligan says, gender roles have changed, but stereotypes haven't.
Mm.
And that really caught me. I'm like, it's true. Slowly they're changing, but the stereotypes still remain. So I think there's also a huge lack of respect for caregiving, which are traditionally women's roles, whether it's children or elderly parents. I think we need to look at that. Violence against women. And I think we have to take some responsibility for what goes on in our head. We've internalized male power.
Mm.
And I think we need to look at that and level the playing field a little bit. And don't get me wrong, I love men. I raised 3 beautiful, successful sons. They're all adults and functioning, wonderful, giving back to society. But we still have some issues. And I think right now we're looking at them more than ever. And I
Yes.
won't wax political.
Yes. No, and I am the child of a single mother, raised me all the way through. And she was even in the career field of education. She was a teacher and a principal, an administrator, a school board member. And we even think in the field of education, and I'm a former teacher myself, where I was one of the only men, but we think of that as a more female prevalent
Mhm.
area of work, and yet she still, even in that, had to fight continuously against men in that field, just for her own stake and claim of success and to own that. And
Yeah.
so I, even if I've noticed in a more female dominated area, there's still those areas to fight in.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And also, I've been reading this month, I read 2 books. One was Circe by Madeline Miller, and the other one was called The Mercies. And the last name is Hargrove on that one. I'm forgetting the first 2 names, but in both books, what's interesting is one is a fictional account of Circe from the Odyssey, and the other one is historical fiction from this tiny island at the top of Norway where there were witch trials in the 1600s. And what both books had in common is this idea of, throughout a lot of history, if a woman had more power than men were comfortable with in any way, it was deemed witch-like. And so I think that has continued to carry this theme of nowadays, women having power, but in the eyes of men, not too much, because if it's too much, then there's got to be something going on here. It can't be that she's just intelligent or just successful. And so I definitely agree that with your uh, summary of that, even if the doors are broken open and more women are entering into different fields, those stereotypes unfortunately are remaining, and those are what we have to work on.
Yep. And the first step is awareness,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and then talking about it, and then taking some action.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, and 2 of the women that I particularly was happy that you included, because I had never heard of them in this book, were Abigail Jane Scott Duniway and Jessie Annette Jack Hooper. And I was interested in both of them, particularly for this conversation, because Abigail Duniway fought for a lot of women's suffrage in Oregon. and Jesse Annette Jack Cooper was in Wisconsin and Illinois. And so I was happy that I was finding out about 2 other women involved in that fight for suffrage, because a lot of times you hear Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and that's kind of
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
But I was happy to hear about those 2 and what they did and how much they fought. I was also really interested in that story from Jesse Annette Jack Cooper, where they marched in Chicago and a huge storm hit and drenched them all, but they kept going. And then
In
later
their
on,
white, yes.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then later on the train, she saw a gentleman and he said he could see them from his hotel and said, well, you know, if they're willing to march in that weather for the right to vote, then, you know, you got my support on that. And so I thought that was a really great anecdote to throw in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's true, seeing what people are willing to do and risk in order to just get even what we think of as the bare minimum today, just being able to have the right to vote. But that leads me into my last question for you. So considering we're posting this around the 100-year anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, what do you think, or why do you think it's so important to remember today the long fought battle for gaining suffrage, especially for women in this country today?
I think it goes way past watching the movies. Iron Jawed Angel is one that I highly recommend people view. I think it goes way beyond that era, you know, to sit here and say, well, because our foremothers fought so hard. We're in a time when our voices are important and they need to be heard. We can't be complacent. When I hear friends say, oh, I don't like the choices, I'm not going to vote, I want to throttle them. You know, we're not just voting for a president, we're voting for Supreme Court justices. We're voting for security of education and housing. We're voting for federal judges. We're voting to protect our natural resources. We're voting for Social Security and health care. We're voting for our veterans who put their lives on the line for us. We're voting for sensible gun laws. We're voting for women's rights also still, including our rights over our bodies. So for heaven's sakes, vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
important. We have a voice, we need to use it. And yes, it was long and hard fought for.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It seems, you know, when I taught US history for 3 years for middle school, and the way that our textbooks are kind of set up nowadays, it seems like we talk about these battles for social progression, but we kind of talk about like there was the women's rights movement, or at least segments of it that have occurred. But it almost seems like, and then they got this and then it went away. Or we have the civil rights movement and then they got this and then it's not a problem anymore. And what I think we're seeing more this year than ever is these problems are not over with.
I remember when I lived in Rhode Island, now we're talking probably 25, 26 years ago, I was the state chairperson for the National Organization for Women for a year or two, and we would go to college campuses and set up our little booth. And it was interesting to watch the co-eds come through the door. They would look at our booth and look away. And so we finally decided to kind of nab a few of these young students and say, so what's up with that? Why can't you come talk to us? Oh, that's all done. Our mothers did that. They marched, they did it, it's over. And I mean, I'm being a little flippant with my response, but that was pretty much what they said. And I think we felt that way about civil rights too. You know, that was in the 60s. We marched, we sang, we got petitions. That's done. None of it's done. And we need to know that. And we need to take a stand.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, I'm still too much.
Hey, that is okay. And see right there, like you're talking about earlier, there's this idea of, if a man is passionate about something, it's this great thing. And if a woman is, it's, ooh, that's a little too much. And so you see how it gets ingrained in all of us.
Thank you for noticing that.
Yeah. You are not too much, Margaret. You are not too much. Keep doing what you're doing. And I'm very interested to read your next books. And
thank you.
I'm very excited I got to read this one. I did also want to add a quick plug, since we were talking about women's organizations, that for anyone watching this interview, the week of August 18th, the local League of Women Voters is putting on an event in Durango and Buckley Park. this Saturday, the 21st, I believe 10 a.m., 10 to 11:30. And it's going to be a celebration of the 19th Amendment. Mask wearing is required as well as social distancing, but I think that's going to be a great event for anyone who's interested to come out and show their support.
Awesome. I do. I want to say a huge thank you to the League of Women Voters. They are near and dear to my heart, and they do amazing work. I love them. Thank you.
Yes, they do. Absolutely. And so those are the questions I have for you today, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I'm so glad we finally got to do this and sit down and have a good conversation.
So am
And
I.
And for anyone interested, the Ignacio Library does have a copy of this book, and we can share it if you are in our Aspen Cat system. And also, Midge, you said you are going to do some revisions, and then
Yes.
this will be available on Amazon, I suspect,
It
eventually.
will be back on Amazon. I removed it a while ago, but they can also visit my website. Is it okay to say?
Yes.
Oh, it's herstory-online.com. And
Perfect.
you can order the book there from me if you want. Or actually, there are some pretty interesting posts about more contemporary women that I put up there a couple times a week, so they might enjoy that website.
Perfect. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for this interview, and it's been great talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.